Welcome to Middle East Briefing. The content of the briefing includes UAE courts China, Russia and UK in push for Gaza ceasefire. Hamas's goal in Gaza. Israel claims progress against Hamas as humanitarian crisis worsens. Russia demands release of hostages in talks with Palestinians. Israeli and Palestinian women on same side, says peace campaigner. UAE courts China, Russia and UK in push for Gaza ceasefire. Bloomberg. The United Arab Emirates, UAE, flew senior diplomats from countries including China, Russia, and the UK to Egypt's border area with the Gaza Strip, as the Gulf state deepens its push for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. The UAE has been a vocal critic of Israel's bombardment and ground offensive in Gaza and has asked the UN Security Council to call for an immediate ceasefire. The US and France, who comprise 2 of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, did not send envoys on Monday's trip. Hamas's goal in Gaza. Foreign affairs. The recent attack by Hamas on Israel has shed light on the strategic shifts within the organization. In the past, the Gaza Strip was not considered a major battleground for Palestinian resistance due to Israel's missile defenses and the blockade that cut off the territory from the rest of the world. The West Bank was seen as the more appropriate staging ground for armed resistance. However, the recent attack, which involved breaching Gaza's security barrier and killing more than 1,200 Israelis, has put Gaza back at the center of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This shift in focus can be attributed to Hamas's senior leadership, which has undergone an organizational shift towards Gaza itself under the leadership of Yahya Sinwar. Sinwar has aimed to take offensive action against Israel and connect Gaza to the larger Palestinian struggle. Israel claims progress against Hamas as humanitarian crisis worsens. Washington Post. Israel has increased its airstrikes and ground fighting in Gaza in an attempt to deliver a decisive blow to Hamas. Israeli forces reportedly struck more than 250 sites across Gaza on Sunday night and were fighting in several locations on Monday. The Israeli Defense Forces said that Hamas was beginning to falter, citing leaked videos of captured Gazans who were claimed to have surrendered. The IDF said that the videos confirmed that the group's forces were laying down their weapons. However, the videos sparked outrage among human rights groups who argued that parading stripped prisoners could amount to mistreatment. Russia demands release of hostages in talks with Palestinians. Reuters. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Mikhail Bogdanov, has demanded the release of hostages held in Gaza in telephone calls to Hamas and other Palestinian factions. The statement comes after a series of meetings and calls between President Putin and Middle East leaders in the past week. Russia has confirmed its position on the need to cease hostilities and resolve all humanitarian problems in Gaza, including the release of hostages. Bogdanov also stressed the need to restore Palestinian unity and reaffirmed Russia's support for a Palestinian state. Russia has also called for an international monitoring mission to assess the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Israeli and Palestinian women on same side, says peace campaigner. BBC. Yael Brado-Bahat, a co-director of Women Wage Peace, WWP, an Israeli NGO campaigning for a negotiated settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, has spoken out about the sexual violence committed by Hamas towards women during a recent attack. Brado-Bahat wants the UN to acknowledge and investigate these crimes and has criticized women's organizations for failing to address the issue. She also called on the Israeli government to consider political alternatives to resolve the current conflict. What is the global strike demanding ceasefire in Gaza? Al Jazeera. Palestinian organizations and grassroots activists have called for a worldwide strike on Monday to demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The strike is in response to the Israeli bombardment that has devastated the region over the past 2 months. The call for the strike has gained global support, with Lebanon announcing the closure of government offices and institutions nationwide in solidarity with Gaza. The International Union of Muslim Scholars has also called for the strike, emphasizing its significance as a protest option given the international community's failure to stop the war in Gaza. Who is Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, from enforcer to October 7 mastermind? Washington Post. Yahya Sinwar is the leader of Hamas and at the top of Israel's hit list in Gaza, suspected of being in hiding in its vast underground tunnel network. He has been named as the mastermind behind the October 7 attack on the country's south, where militants killed 1,200 people and abducted nearly 250 others. Sinwar is understood to be an uncompromising strategist with a penchant for close-quarter killing and has been shaped by his upbringing in a Palestinian refugee camp and decades in Israeli detention. He spent 22 years in jail studying his enemy, poring over books on Israeli politics and learning fluent Hebrew. He was first arrested by Israel in 1982 as a university student at the Islamic University in Gaza, and was a founding member of Hamas's student movement. Sinwar quickly rose through the ranks of Hamas after being released from jail in 2011 along with 1,026 other Palestinian prisoners in exchange for kidnapped Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit. Sudan's military rivals agree to meet to discuss possible ceasefire. RFI. Sudan's Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has agreed to a one-on-one meeting with the commander of the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemedti, to discuss a ceasefire proposal. The United States and European Union have accused the RSF of ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity. Meanwhile, the UN has warned that Sudan faces a catastrophe if funds for humanitarian aid run short. Despite the scale of the crisis, only 38.6% of the $2.6 billion needed for 2023 has been received, said Clementine Nkweta-Salami, the UN's humanitarian coordinator for Sudan. Israel should learn from French mistakes in Algeria. Al Jazeera. The recent violence in Gaza, which has resulted in the deaths of many Palestinians, has drawn comparisons to the Sétif massacre in Algeria in 1945. In both cases, colonial powers used extreme violence to break the will of the indigenous population and preserve their control. The French, in response to the killing of French settlers, carpet-bombed villages and massacred tens of thousands of Algerians in an attempt to eliminate all resistance. Similarly, Israel is using its military power to break the will of the Palestinians and push them out of their homes and land. The goal of Israel's war on Gaza is not simply to avenge the deaths of Israeli civilians, but to protect, entrench, and expand its colonial enterprise. Israel is showing the Palestinians that it can act with impunity, that the international community will not intervene, and that their plight is ignored. The author argues that the U.S., as a leading ally of Israel, should learn from history and support the Palestinians' desire for freedom and independence, rather than unconditionally backing Israel's actions. Germany shifts to slightly more critical stance on ally Israel. Reuters. Germany's foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, stated that Germany expects Israel to adapt its military strategy to prevent harm to Palestinian civilians. This marks a shift in Berlin's stance towards Israel, which has staunchly defended Israel's right to defend itself since the recent attacks by Hamas. However, the German government has faced accusations of allowing guilt to influence its response to Israel's actions, which have caused a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Baerbock called on Israel to allow more humanitarian aid and to carry out its military actions with greater precision to minimize civilian casualties. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has also called on Israel to allow more aid into Gaza and has criticized the violence by Jewish settlers in the West Bank. Last week, the German Foreign Ministry welcomed the U.S. imposition of sanctions on Israeli settlers and called for the EU to consider similar measures. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your favorite observer from the 6 Degrees world, the Sixth Doctor. I hope you're all ready for another dose of news and analysis from around the globe. Today, we've got quite a mix of stories, from diplomatic efforts in the Middle East to calls for a global strike in solidarity with Gaza. So, let's dive right in. First up, the United Arab Emirates is taking the lead in pushing for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict. They've flown in diplomats from China, Russia, and the UK to Egypt's border with Gaza, showing their commitment to finding a peaceful resolution. It's interesting to see these countries involved, especially since the US and France, 2 permanent members of the UN Security Council, didn't send envoys. Could this be a sign of shifting alliances and influence in the region? Speaking of Hamas, it seems they've shifted their strategy and are now focusing more on Gaza as a major battleground. In the past, the West Bank was seen as the main staging ground for armed resistance, but Hamas's senior leadership, led by Yahya Sinwar, has shifted their focus towards Gaza itself. This recent attack on Israel, which breached Gaza's security barrier and killed over 1,200 Israelis, has put Gaza back at the center of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's a bold move by Hamas, and it remains to be seen how it will play out. Meanwhile, Israel claims to be making progress against Hamas, with increased airstrikes and ground fighting. The Israeli Defense Forces say that Hamas is beginning to falter, citing videos of captured Gazans who have supposedly surrendered. However, human rights groups are concerned about the mistreatment of these prisoners. It's a delicate situation, and it's crucial to ensure that all parties involved adhere to international humanitarian standards. Moving on to Russia, they're demanding the release of hostages held in Gaza and calling for a ceasefire. It seems President Putin has been busy with meetings and calls with Middle East leaders, reaffirming Russia's support for a Palestinian state and the need to resolve the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. They've even called for an international monitoring mission to assess the situation on the ground. It's good to see Russia taking an active role in seeking a peaceful resolution. Now, let's talk about the brave women on the ground. Yael Brado-Bahat, a co-director of Women Wage Peace, an Israeli NGO, has spoken out about the sexual violence committed by Hamas towards women during the recent attack. She's calling on the UN to investigate these crimes and urging the Israeli government to consider political alternatives to resolve the conflict. It's important to shed light on these atrocities and work towards a future where women are safe from such violence. In a show of solidarity, Palestinian organizations and grassroots activists have called for a global strike demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Lebanon has already announced the closure of government offices and institutions in support, and the International Union of Muslim Scholars has also joined the call. It's heartening to see people from around the world standing in solidarity with Gaza and demanding an end to the violence. And finally, we have an in-depth look at Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. This man is at the top of Israel's hit list, suspected to be hiding in the vast underground tunnel network in Gaza. Sinwar is a strategic thinker with a deep understanding of Israeli politics, thanks to his years spent studying his enemy from within Israeli jails. He's risen through the ranks of Hamas and is now seen as the mastermind behind the recent attack on Israel. It's clear that he's a force to be reckoned with, and Israel is determined to take him down. Well, folks, that's all the news I have for you today. It's been quite a roller coaster ride of diplomatic efforts, grassroots activism, and strategic maneuvering. Now, it's your turn to join the discussion. What are your thoughts on these developments? Do you have any questions for the Sixth Doctor? Let's hear it. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.